Hi, everyone. My name is Mary Ronan with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. And thanks for joining us for a short 15-minute video on the Great Lakes Data Jam competition. This is a student competition that we are launching through Friends of Rhinestone Woods in partnership with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. This competition is made possible thanks to a small basin grant through the New York State Sea Grant and the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. So let's take a look on how we can dive into data literacy with this student competition. So what we'll be doing in this video, I'll give you an introduction to what a data jam is. I'll show you where and how to access the data and what's in those data sets. And then we'll look at some examples of student projects so you can get an idea of what you or your students might be interested in doing. And then some tips for incorporating the projects into classrooms, clubs, and how students can be supported throughout the project. Just a quick shout out to the Cary Institute of Ecosystem Studies. They have been leading the Hudson Data Jam competition for 9 years now, and our Great Lakes Data Jam competition is very closely modeled after this Hudson Data Jam competition, given permission, of course, by the Cary Institute. But we'll take a look at some of their student examples and resources very similar to what we're looking for in the Great Lakes Data Jam. So this data jam came out of a desire for us at Rhinestone Woods to really engage students in place-based education, specifically right in the Great Lakes. We're right next to Lake Erie. And if you look at that green area there, that's the Niagara River Lake Erie watershed where many of us live and work. So we wanted to give students a way to explore and analyze what's going on in our own backyards. This is not the only way that we've done that. We also have our annual Day in the Life of the Niagara River Lake Erie Watershed program, in which students and educators throughout this watershed go out and collect water quality data throughout the region. And students have been analyzing that data for years, but we're hoping that the Great Lakes Data Jam will open up that to have a new creative way for students to analyze data like what we collect during this program, and also for students outside of that experience to really engage in data that's being collected way in our backyards. So here's some data that was collected right in our backyards. This is showing different plastics that were collected in Lake Michigan and Lake Erie. And you can see here a little bit of information you can gather from this chart here. So you can see that the particle type, the fibers and lines, you can see the color. There's some X's here and there, but looking at this, it's not very clear what the results of this study were. And the scientists know this as well. And so what they did is they put it into a visual that helps us better understand the data that they collected. And already I'm getting so much more information out of this. First of all, my eyes go right over here to Western New York, where I'm giving us a pat on the back for having really low plastic levels. But also, some questions start popping up in my head. If I go over here to Ohio and Michigan, why are there so many plastics collected in this area? Also, if we look here at the plastic type, that orange color represents fibers and lines. So, why are there so many fibers being found in Lake Erie? So, just by doing a simple visual representation of the data, already it helps us understand the results better and sparks a conversation. And so there's all sorts of ways to represent data. Here are some creative ways that we've shared data. If you look over here on your right, this artist is showing the total amount of plastic that's produced since 1950 and where it's gone. And they've done it in a really creative way. They collected plastic part pieces from beaches and they use the colors to represent different things. So blue represents plastics that are still in use and white represents discarded plastics. And just by looking at this, I understand that we have discarded much more plastics than we have recycled or continue to use. A great way to tell that story. Now, many of our students might be more interested in telling the stories through video. So, for example, we'll show you this TikTok here. I know you can't hear it, but this person is sharing the data results in Ireland about microplastics, and they're doing it in a really simple way. They're just using really engaging pictures in the background, they're putting some text over the screen. Really simple, but we're getting an understanding of that larger data set. So, a data jam, the goal is to engage students in storytelling, telling the story of the data in our backyard. Now, storytelling can come in a few different ways. So, here's a visual representation that really stuck with me when I saw it. Over on the left, this shows that you can see in the text that every day we discard 1.3 billion plastic bottles. Now, if you just tell me that number, it doesn't mean too much to me. I know it's a lot and it might make my jaw drop a little bit, but it's hard for me to understand. But if you put it in a visual picture, I get it now. That plastic uh, water bottle pile placed next to the Eiffel Tower, that's a ton of plastic water bottles. And if we look at it over the past 10 years, that's covering could cover an entire section of New York City. Much more engaging for me. If you look at this visual representation of data, the first thing that sticks out when I see it is that word dead in big, bold red letters. And so, using the legends, we can figure out what's going on in this. So, that word dead is a phrase that means extinct, the status of a species. So, that represents extinct species. And the size of the letter represents how many species are in that category in that region. And so, this was a great way to communicate data about vulnerable, endangered, and extinct species around the world. But it doesn't have to be a graphic representation. This is a 3D representation of data. And so here we have knitted fibers representing daily temperatures in two different regions and how they've changed over the years. This representation shows the number of deaths by terrorism from the 1940s all the way to today. And so this artist chose to represent that data using different sized wooden balls. Really, nothing that has to do with terrorism, but that representation is enough to spark a conversation and also really accurately represents the data. We have significantly more deaths by terrorism today than we did in the 1940s. So that's what we're trying to do with the Great Lakes Data Jam. We're trying to empower students to find creative ways to share some of the data results from our backyards. So this is a short student video. It's available on our website to kind of engage students and explain the Data Jam steps. Step one is to choose a data set that interests you as a class or student and graph the data. Step two is complete a short report. And when I mean short, it's fairly short. So it's not a huge paper. And step three is finding a way to creatively share that information. And that can be done in all sorts of different ways. It could be a song, it could be a poster, it could be a video like we've seen, but there's all different ways to share those findings and results. We want to make sure it's something that's engaging for students, makes people listen. And let's not forget, this is a student competition. There is prize money involved. So, just to kind of see those steps laid out a little bit, again, step one, choose a data set, analyze the data, identify the trends. And the student worksheets will walk you through this. Step two, develop a creative way to communicate the data trends. Again, that's where you're doing that storytelling of the data. Step three, submit a scientific report and creative project. That's all going to be done online. And step four is our project judging and showcase event. So let's take a look at the data sets themselves. What are we asking students to look at? The data sets are divided into three different categories. Level one are data sets that we believe fourth and fifth grade students working in teams or as a class could analyze. And so you can see the different categories there, ranging from temperature and precipitation over the last 100 years to microplastics that were found in Great Lakes sediment. Level two is targeted towards middle school, expanding into things like biodiversity, land cover, and then that last one, watercraft inspection steward program. that is information that Western New York Prison provided about invasive species that were collected when they did their watercrafts inspections over the past year. Level three, these are more complicated data sets. They're going to require students to sort through and kind of pick out what they want to chart and graph. And so level three is definitely targeted towards high school students and expands into things like toxicity. And then there's where you're going to find some of our day in the life data. Now, that said, if your students are interested in something, or as a class, you're interested in something in a data set that's outside of your age grade level, that's fine. So, for example, if you're a fifth grade class and you really want to talk about biodiversity, feel free to hop on over and look at that level two data set. If you are a high school class and you want to talk about and look at microplastic information, hop on down to level two or level one. There's no rules on what data sets you have to use, but they must be from these data sets, right? At this point, we're not taking in any outside data. So in order to access these data sets, you are going to go to rhinesteinwoods.org. And when you go to our Friends of Rhinestone Woods website, you'll see here's our link to the Great Lakes Data Gem. Go ahead, click right on that. And here you're going to see all sorts of information. First of all, if you're interested in all at competing this year, please fill out our short form so we can keep you in the loop on what's going on. But then there's some important links. And in here, you're going to see our educator's guide as well as the link to the data sets and resources. And then when you've decided that, yes, you want to participate this year, you can register right from here as well. Let's take a look at the first two links will take you right to here. This is going to be our shared Google folder. Please contact me if you have any problems accessing it. It might look a little bit different here because you won't have editor status, but all these files should be accessible to you. So when you come here, you can find a few things. First of all, that Data Jam Educator's Guide. If you are an educator or even a student, I highly encourage you to look through this guide. It's going to have all of the links for how to register and submit your projects, as well as all of the rules and regulations. So please look through that PDF. You'll also find all of our data set levels here that we were just looking at. So for example, if we click on level one, we'll see the different folders for the data sets. So the first one that I mentioned was temperature and precipitation over the past 100 years. For each data set, you're going to have a few files. You'll have a PDF that's going to give you the background information for that data set. That PDF is going to have things in there that's going to help explain to students what's going on in the data set, as well as having some important information that they will need to fill out in their scientific report. So if you scroll down, you'll see the data source. That's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. You'll notice how it was collected, um, and then some data citations, etc. And so these are, you are all going to need to pull from this background information to put into your scientific report. If we go back, we can actually open up the data sets themselves. Some of them will be in two different forms. It's the same data. A CSV file is just sometimes a little bit more useful for in some graphing software. But for the most of us, we'll probably be using this Google Sheets or Excel file here. So you can open it up and you can see the entire data set laid out for you there. So I highly encourage you to pause the video here, head to rhinesteinwoods.org and look through these data sets just to see what's out there and see what might be interesting for you or your students. All right, now that you've had a chance to look through those data sets, let's talk about graphing the data. So to graph the data, we did put a couple of resources in that shared Google folder. Let's take a look at those right now. So if we look under here under additional resources, there's some PDF files that are really helpful in choosing the right type of chart or graph for your data. So for example, this graph choice chart walks you or your students through some questions to figure out, is the best thing for your data a pie chart or a line graph showing changes over time. So this is a great tool to use. There's a simplified version here that I also really like. I'll zoom in on that a little bit. So for example, I'm always tempted to go right for a line graph, but that's really showing a comparison over time. And you might actually be choosing to show comparisons in different categories or relationships between variables. And so maybe that line chart is not the best one to choose. So these resources are helpful. There's also one that's greater, a little bit better for our fourth and fifth grade students, explaining pie charts, bar graphs, and line graphs. So when you are graphing the data, let's go back to our annual temperature and precipitation. You can do that right here in Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets by just highlighting that data and inserting a chart. And so you can change the chart type here, but Google Sheets is very helpful in choosing some of the right charts. So for example, you wouldn't want a pie chart here. That's not going to communicate the best, not going to be the best way to communicate this information. So you can do that right in something like Excel, but you could also have students be hand graphing, and then you can scan in those hard copies. So after you create the chart, you are going to be filling out your student report for this for part one. So let's go back to our shared folder here. And you can see our scientific report can be found here. If you download this, this is a fillable PDF. And you're going to be filling out some things, again, right from the background source information, what's the data source, what methods were used, but you as a group or team or class or individual will have to figure out the dependent and the independent variables. We have some tools to help you do that. This blue box shows you what the judges are going to be looking for in here. And then you'll be doing your data representation and then also describing any trends that or patterns that you see and a possible explanation for that. So you're going to be filling that all out in the scientific report, adding your references before moving on to the creative project. So again, we chose the data set, we analyzed the data and identified the trends. Step two is developing a creative way to communicate data trends. So this is telling the story of the data. We saw some professional examples of that previously, but let's take a look at how students are doing this. And to do that, we are going to dive into the Carey Institute, again, that Hudson Data Jam competition that's been going on for multiple years. And so to do that, you can copy this link here, or you can go right to Google and just Google Hudson Data Jam. And that will pull up that website for you. You can go to the Hudson Data Jam competition and scroll down to the project gallery. This is going to show the winners of this competition from 2017 all the way to last year's winners. And so you can click on them and take a look at what other students chose to do to represent their data, and that might help you get some ideas for what you might choose or your students might choose for this. So again, I'm going to have you pause the video here, Google Hudson Data Jam competition, scroll down to Project Gallery, and take a look at those student projects. Okay, so after you've taken a look at them, the next steps that you will do is after completing your creative projects, you will then fill out a little bit of information explaining your projects, and then you'll submit it all online. So the project judging will take place in early March with the Data Jam Showcase coming up on March 22nd. Little background on the Data Jam Showcase. This is a one-day event at Tift Nature Preserve. And when I say event, I mean event. It is much more than an awards ceremony. So during this event, you must apply by January 20th. We know that you won't have submitted a project by then. However, we just need to have a clear idea of who might be attending prior to March. So, as long as you are planning to submit a Data Jam project, and at this, we have opened it up to all students. So, that's fourth through high school students. So, you can ignore that right there. You can apply to attend the Data Jam showcase. This you can send up to 10 student representation representatives per school. We understand that you might be working in some smaller groups. If you would like to send more, you can request that in your application. If your application is accepted, your busing will be completely covered for that day. So at the Data Jam Showcase, it is an award ceremony, but students will also be invited to bring and display their projects. And then we'll have some interactive activities. We're going to be inviting stakeholders from different organizations throughout our watershed to represent their environmental organizations. And so students will have a chance to engage with and interact with these stakeholders, but we're also going to have them do a fun activity where they work in small groups with a set budget to identify the needs of their community. Maybe there's flooding or pollution problems in their community, or they want to increase biodiversity. They'll actually be going out and chatting with these different representatives and then figuring out how they would allocate that money. And so this is a great way to get students experience in the role of a watershed stakeholder and also exposed to some different career options within the environmental field. We'll also try to incorporate a nature walk being at the showcase is held at such a beautiful place like Tiff Nature Preserve. So the timeline for this, we've finished up our educator trainings, but we do have some Q&As available in January and February. So these are open to any students and any educators to come and ask us questions. You can also reach out. I'll put my contact information up at the end of the program, and you can reach out at any time. I'm happy to chat with you directly or to even lead a short presentation for students. Then we have our upcoming deadline to apply to attend the Data Jam Showcase. Again, you can apply as long as you are planning to submit a project. Then the registration deadline for the Data Jam is the end of February with projects due on March 8th. So we have about 2.5 months for students to be working on and submitting their projects for this year's Data Jam. So, how are we helping you get this done? So, if you're an educator, some things that we're doing is we have our Data Jam Educators Guide. I'll show you that in just a moment. Our Q&A sessions are open, and we're also covering your busing. So, let's take a look at that Educators Guide right now. That's in the shared Google folder. You can scroll down here. It's also linked on our Data Jam website. You can see that it goes through the essentials, the rules and regulations, the timeline, and then includes some of those student pages. And so you can links are included in this file to that shared folder, to the registration forms, to where the projects will be submitted. So if, for example, if you open up that link, it'll take you to this Google form, and you can see that you would submit your projects by filling out this form and then attaching things like the parent and guardian consent forms, which are required for any participating student, that scientific report, your chart, and your creative project. Now, your creative project might be 3D. And so, in order to submit that, you would have to take a video or picture of your project and then submit that electronically. If your project is a online video, you can go ahead and share your link on there as well, or a website or an app or something itself. You can add the link there if that works out best. Otherwise, we will need some sort of picture or video that explains what your 3D project is. So all of that's available there in the educator guide, as well as some details about the judges, the showcase event, some contact information for us, and then very importantly, the rules and regulations. So, how are we supporting students? Well, we do have some guided worksheets, so I'll show you those in just a moment. We have students are welcome to attend our Q&A sessions. We also are providing cash prizes, and I'm sorry again, we have a little mistake here. We do have one grand prize of $200. two high school level prizes at $100 each to be split among the groups or individuals on each project, and a fourth through eighth grade honorable mention, two awards there. So for those shared student or those guiding worksheets, those are available right in the shared Google Drive here. So the student planning checklist, I'll zoom in a little bit, walks students through what's needed. You can even put due dates here if you're working in classes, and there's also some resources to help. So one thing that we might have a hard time doing is identifying those independent and dependent variables. That's linked right there. Um, there's also some resources that I showed you for choosing the right chart or the right graph. Um, CodeApp is a great online software if you want it for graphing. So that's one where you can just drop in those files and it will kind of graph it for you. And some tips on how to use Google Sheets. So it walks students through this checklist and then also helps them think about that by linking them to the Hudson Data Jam creative projects. We also have available in there kind of a more guided sheet that kind of walks students through the data sets and helps collect some of the information that they're going to need for that scientific report. If you want to see how the projects will be judged, we also included the judging rubric here so you know what to put your energy towards. Educators, you can help with student support as well. Um, so any student can participate. You might be doing this in small groups in class. You might be doing this as a club, or you might have students working on this as individuals, just wanting to kind of take on this competition. But if you do dedicate class or club time, that really will help students complete this project. But you can also just be there as an adult mentor, providing that feedback and guidance and possible incentives like extra credit. Now, there are educators who've been participating in data jams for many, many years. And so some of their tips that they've shared through the Carey Institute is engaging parents, so sending a letter home explaining the project. Um, and then also keeping this flexible. So, for example, what one educator does is have all of the students analyze the data in class. So everyone's looking at those data sets and everyone's graphing the data sets, but the actual creative project is optional. So that's another way to maybe incorporate this and have students engaged in data analysis using place based data, but not taking up a lot of class time for that creative project. Allowing for student choice when possible, so students can choose a data set that's interesting to them, reminding them that cash prizes are involved. But also, just if you are looking for some more tips on how teachers have done this, I highly encourage you to go to that Carey Institute website, look at their webinars, and they have some fantastic teachers sharing their experience. So, again, that is our introduction to the Great Lakes Data Jam. I'm going to put my information up here on the screen here, and you can reach out to me with any questions. But we really hope you participate. But this is only going to be possible if we have enough interest this year. So please head back to rhinesteinwoods.org and click on the Great Lakes Data Jam and click on I'm interested. And that's going to make sure that we keep you updated and we know who's planning on participating. Thanks so much. Have a great day.